period. Which one?
Hi, I'm Lisanne Miller with Cushing and Company, and today we're in the dye kitchen. We're going to dye antique black, and also we're going to dye some antique teal and antique red. I want to thank Rug Hooking Magazine for this opportunity, and also anything that we go over today as far as dyeing antique black and alternative formulas, they are in the dye book, Beautiful Wool in the Dye Kitchen with me. So let's start. And as we see down here, we're going to use three colors. We're going to use dark green, burgundy, peacock. These three colors we will use in different variations for antique black. Over dyeing wools that you have in your stash that are really obtrusive. This is clothing from Sag Harbor, a gray, burgundy, red, light blue, an old cream. When you're dyeing little pieces, you're not going to dye them as black. You're going to model them and make them dark, so when you cut them and put them together, you make an antique black background. An antique black background consists of burgundy, dark green, hunter green, all sorts of different colors modeled. So that's what we're going to start dyeing first. Our dye formula for this, which I've already done, is in 4 cups of boiling water, a 1/4 teaspoon of dark green, in 4 cups of boiling water, 1/8 teaspoon of burgundy, and in 4 cups boiling water, a 32nd teaspoon of peacock. So they are in here, they're in with the boiling water. This is your dye solution. These three make your dye solution, and I'm stirring them to make sure they're good. You can tell with the steam they're boiling. And if you notice, I have a placemat, some paper towels down, but I also have, if this was another type of formula, I have my dye colors right in front of what I'm using. And by doing it that way, if I have an order to put them in, I don't confuse the order. I know what is in each measuring cup. So, over on the stove, I have a pot, and in the pot I have water that is boiling. It is not simmering, but it is boiling. So we're not going to get too close to the pot because it will fog up the camera. And I am going to pour my dye bath into here, starting with the dark green. Then going into the burgundy, and pouring in the peacock last. Now for this, it doesn't really matter the order that you pour it in, but I like to put the peacock in last because it's the strongest color. So now I'm going to stir this because now what were dye solutions mixed together now becomes the dye bath. And this is the dye bath, and this is the color. Okay, so I'm just making sure the colors have mixed together, and they have. So this is now ready. And in here, in this pot, I have wools that have been soaking for 24 hours in Lemon Joy, and they're the colors that I showed you earlier. So what I'm going to do, because we don't want this splashing around, but we do want this modeled. So I am going to drop these. As you can see, they're still very wet, and they should be. They shouldn't have dried or anything, and I'm dropping them into the pot. Okay? And after I drop them into the pot, I am going to take my spoon, and I'm going to push them down. And this is where you can stir the pot. You have full permission right now to stir the pot as much as you like. Open up each piece, okay? Each piece is open, they're not folded into each other, and you can tell it's already started to take shape. And now we're in here and we're moving it around. The pot is stirred, okay? And like I said, we're deepening the colors. We're not making all the colors black. If that was the case, we would just over dye it with black. And already you can see how much the dye bath has started to exhaust. When the color goes out of the dye bath, that is called exhausting. So now we have this on here and we're going to cook it for 20 minutes. By cooking it for 20 minutes, if you notice, we haven't added a mordant yet. We haven't added citric and we have not added vinegar. We have put it in, we're letting it soak in, and for 20 minutes we're going to just let it soak in and take in the color. Also, when you're using clothing, you have to make sure if it's not 100% wool, the 20 minutes lets you saturate it and get as much color onto it as possible. So for 20 minutes, which we won't sit here for 20 minutes, but for 20 minutes this will cook. After 20 minutes, I am going to take a 1/4 cup of vinegar and I'm going to pour it into the dye bath. This is my mordant. This will finish setting the colors. I'm going to let it sit another 5 minutes on the heat, then I'm going to shut the pot off. When I dye these colors, I like them to sit overnight. I shut the bath off, I let it cool completely, and the next morning I come down and then I will wring them out, rinse them out, and put them in the dryer. When you want a deeper color, if you let it sit overnight, the color will deepen by at least 1 to 2 shades. So we'll let this cook. We have 20 minutes. We'll let this cook. And now I'm going to come over and I'm going to show you the magic and what it looks like. Here are the colors out of the dye bath, completely cooked. Okay, this one here was a piece of clothing. And it did take it, it was this color right here, and now it's this color. So you would cut all of these up, pull and hook, and it would make an antique black background. So the colors went from these bright colors, like this, to these deeper colors to make an antique black background. This turned into this beautiful color, works great. There's that one, which is deeper. And then this one didn't take as much. It may have a little bit of synthetic in it, but we're not really sure, but it's still a beautiful piece to mix in with your antique black. And when you stir the pot and you keep the motion going around, you get this uneven dye, which makes it look absolutely beautiful with highs and lows when you cut it to hook it. So this is the before, this is the after, and there we are. It's a good use of all your scraps, clothing, etc. Here are colors that you can use. Have fun with it. And here again is the dye formula. Now, if these are not dark enough for you, you can always do 2 solutions. Just say, Lisanne, I have a lot more wool to put in. Okay, you can either make double these or do it once, do the dye solutions once, pour them in, do them a second time, pour them in, so you have a double dye bath. Or if you just want them deeper, you can change that to a half, that to a quarter, and that to an eighth. Peacock is a very intense color, so you don't want to overdo it to make it turn turquoise. But the others you can duplicate, double, whatever you would like. This gives you a basis for antique black. There are many versions, many ways to dye this. This is the standard that works for me. So this is a good spring point for you to jump on, get on, dye some, experiment, turn the solid wool you won't use into wool you will use for antique black. I got some questions too, because some people said, Lisanne, I don't have scraps, I don't have clothing, I just don't have it. I want to dye an antique red, an antique teal, or something over gray. So here is a yard each of our antique tealish green and our red. If you notice, this is really Santa suit red. And if you don't have all these little scraps, you want to dye in bulk for a background, these colors work fabulous. We use them quite a bit. They're a good base color. And then you would change your formula. You would still use a pot dye like you did before, but your formula will change. So now your formula in 4 cups of boiling water is a half a teaspoon of dark green, a half a teaspoon of burgundy, and then a half a teaspoon of peacock. And you're going over a yard, and actually you're going over a yard and 3 inches. You always want to give a little bit extra because the wool will shrink somewhat when you're putting it into the boiling water and you're dyeing with it. So if you want the red or the teal, you would again mix these 3 solutions. These are your dye solutions. You would pour them in your pot to make your dye bath. They would go into the pot for a dye bath, and then this wool wetted would go in there, and you would stir the whole yard at a time, and you would really stir it. And then when you get done, you get a fabulous color. So on top of this very dull green, these 3 colors were put in as the dye bath, and this is what we got at the end. So you can see the hints of burgundy, you can see a little peacock and the dark green. And this would make a beautiful antique background. It's also repeatable. Some of you have asked for a repeatable antique background. This is repeatable. This is a solid wool. It's always the same color base. As long as you follow this formula over here, your results, your modeling will be a little different, but you'll be able to dye yard, 2 yards at a time, and you will get a beautiful piece of antique teal. And like I said, when you cut this up and you go to hook this, it makes a beautiful, beautiful antique background, just like that. And if you have some solid black or something else you would like, you can always mix that in. Now, Santa Suit Red. We like Santa Suit Red. Santa Suit Red is a great color to spring off of. We like it so much we have it in 100-yard rolls in the shop. It's a great wool. It's a great wool to spring off of. And if you follow the formula again, you would do a dye bath with all of these 3 colors. You would put them into the pot like we did with these little colors, and then you would get another surprise. You would get your antique red, your vintage Santa suit, whatever you would like. And you can see some of the base red peeks through for highlights. If you didn't want it to peek through, you would stir it. I obviously did not stir the pot enough because some did peek through, but that's okay. I like the highs and the lows. And you can see it's very dark, and it is an antique red. And then when you went to hook it, you would end up with a beautiful antique red that you could really combine with your antique teal if you wanted to. This makes great Santa suits, great vintage antique backgrounds, vintage roses, etc. The last thing is gray. A lot of us have gray in our stash, but we don't know what to do with gray. And when I mean gray, I mean a flat gray. And this is almost like a 3-piece suit gray. There's no other color. It's a little thin. I wouldn't like to hook with it as is. But again, if I put it through the dye pot and I put it in with this formula, the more intense formula, and I put it in a yard at a time, what I get is absolutely beautiful. These are 2 different yards. One I used a weaker solution. One I used this stronger solution. So this one here, the darker one, which is still very different from the teal, as you can see, and I'll lay them together in a second. This was the base. I dyed this solution, the heavier solution over it, and I now have something very lovely, something that I will use probably in my next rug. And then I also have a thicker wool. It's a little bit thicker, it's easier to cut, it's not as thin, and I got all sorts of highlights because I really stirred the pot. So I went from gray flannel suit to knockout background. Then I went back to the original formula, the lighter formula. And I just did the 1/4 teaspoon of dark green, the 1/8 of a teaspoon of burgundy, and the 32nd teaspoon of peacock. And I got a much lighter version. You can see the peacock really stood out in the lighter version. You can see some, I stirred, but there's some of the gray still kind of showing. But the two together, you have the darker and then the highlights. You actually get double bang out of it, and you get to use it in a background. So if you were echoing your motifs, you could echo in the light, then fill in with the dark. So these two pieces, just to repeat it, this is the lighter solution over the gray. This is the darker formula over the gray. And this was the base coat. Here is our red with the darker solution, and here was the base. Here is the teal, the antique teal. Here is the base, and this is with the darker solution. Now what we have left are the three colors by themselves. And here is the teal, the red, and the gray. And you could put all of them together for a background, or remove the red, make this your background, and make this part of your flowers. And it would make awesome antique roses and awesome highlights in leaves, etc. So, 3 colors, dark green, burgundy, and peacock, different formulas. By using the different concentrations, you do get different things. And then you can always throw in your little bits and pieces that you pot dyed for Antique Black, and they all go together beautifully. Now, some questions had arisen, so I want to go over a few things. Just so you are aware, also in the dye book, which we're not going to go over today, is how to dye antique black over black, and the formula is in the book. It's got about 4, 5, 6 different colors that you add on. Again, you can add it on in different concentrations to get what you would like, but this gives you a good starting point. Now, I've been asked about the Lemon Joy. Here is the Lemon Joy. I know it's a little hard to get. The reason we use Lemon Joy is it does not have any petroleum products. So the petroleum products that are in some hand washing solutions create a slickness. It's almost like adding a synthetic to the wool. The Lemon Joy does not, and you can get it at Walmart, but you can also get it if your office supply is WB Mason, and they have it in stock at all times. So the Lemon Joy, yes, it will not yellow your wool, but it does work. It does make it so that the fibers are open and can accept the dye. That's what you want. You soak the wool to open the fibers to accept the dye. Vinegar. We use, this happens to be a great value, just the white vinegar. Just the plain white vinegar that you get in the food store. The white vinegar that you get in the food store is what you can use to set. It will work fine. You do not need an industrial strength or a cleaning vinegar. It is too strong and it can burn your wool. So plain ordinary vinegar does work. Now, that is not true for the citric acid. The citric acid needs to be a good strength of citric acid, not the stuff that you would use in canning. You do need a stronger solution of citric acid. So I hope that is helpful. And if you have any questions, I will be online and I'll be answering your questions on Antique Black. I hope that you take all of your scraps and stuff that you're not going to use and turn it into beautiful wool. Thank you. And I again thank Rug Hooking Magazine, and we will see you again next month, where I'm going to put the antique red to good use with some textures and hook some antique roses. Hope everyone is well and stay safe. Thanks. Bye-bye for now.